Now to Canberra, and the federal government is under mounting pressure from the Independents and the Greens to release a business plan by the National Broadband Network management before they vote on the first round of legislation in the Senate to implement the NBN rollout. The government is so far refusing to do so until after cabinet deliberations and warns that any delay to the bill will add to the cost of the NBN. The parliamentary debate has intensified after an OECD report criticising the concept of a publicly owned monopoly on wholesale internet services. Political editor Heather Hewitt.
It's crunch time for government legislation enforcing a deal for Telstra to take part in the rollout of the National Broadband Network. But things aren't going as smoothly as the government might have hoped.
If the bill is not passed, this will mean a more expensive build for the National Broadband Network. It will undermine the negotiation between Telstra and National Broadband Network Company. And this is just about, as always with Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott, delay and in truth trying to sink the National Broadband Network.
This is the most reckless decision ever taken by this very reckless government.
Let's be clear, Malcolm continues to not understand.
The government's legislation, which we are seeking to amend, will exclude the highly monopolistic, anti-competitive deal between Telstra and the NBN from the scrutiny of our competition watchdog, the ACCC.
It's just a very underhand way of doing it. The ACCC have a central role in this negotiations and these discussions.
The centrepiece of Labor's election campaign and the first part of a package of legislation to implement the NBN has been hit by last-minute opposition amendments seeking tougher ACCC scrutiny. These failed to get through the House of Representatives late today. The opposition's private members' bill for an inquiry by the Productivity Commission also looks destined to fail. But that doesn't mean the government is off the hook. The Greens and the Independents have begun to arc up, demanding the immediate release of a business plan by NBN Co.
How can you expect us to vote on a $43 billion piece of information infrastructure when we're in an information vacuum? At the very least, we need to see the business plan as a matter of urgency. Cabinet now has it. That business plan needs to be released.
I would hate this to be a strategic exercise by government to let this final 2 weeks of the parliament run out and then to release the business case of NBN as some sort of Christmas present to the Australian people without parliamentary scrutiny. I think we can all do better than that, and we've all been around long enough to see that trick coming.
I think it's a matter of urgency. There's been some talk for some time about the business plan being rolled out. And I think the government leaves itself exposed on this issue, that if the plan is done, it should be out there.
Let's have a look at what's going on here. While we're debating the bill, the network is being built. And we're taking a lot on trust and a lot on faith here, and I think time's up really, which is why we're calling for the business plan.
Just as the government thought it had the Greens and the Independents pretty much on side, this afternoon the Greens gave notice of a motion in the Senate demanding the immediate release of the business plan, a plan that's now in the hands of the Communications Minister Stephen Conroy.
This is a 400-page document that's very complex. We only received it on Monday of last week. I've already had a 3-hour briefing on it. I've got another 4-hour briefing myself coming up later this week. Then it has to go to my Cabinet colleagues, and ultimately the Cabinet makes this decision. But we are committed to releasing as much information from the business plan as we can without breaching commercial and confidence. So there's a whole range of information which we will be making available. But until the Cabinet has had a chance to be briefed on it yet, I'm not in a position that I can commit to when it specifically will be released.
I know some people are saying there's 400 pages. Well, so what? Let's get it out there, and if it's good news, well, let's hear it. If it's not so good, well, I think people deserve to see it. But let's get it out there and see what it actually says.
Bring it on. Cabinet can meet right now if it wants to, and 400 pages, I would hope every single one of the 20-odd ministers who have been given the honour of representing this country at that level can get through 400 pages in a day at least and make some decisions quickly.
It's a document prepared for them by the National Broadband Network, which was 100% owned by the Australian taxpayer. That should be in the public domain now. There's no excuse really to continue delaying, and I don't want to see a repeat of what we had with the implementation study, where the release was delayed for months.
What's happening here is that the Greens and some of the independents are flexing their muscles and putting the government on notice that their support can't be taken for granted. When the legislation splitting the wholesale and retail arms of Telstra goes before the Senate this week, the opposition will have another crack at introducing amendments. While the Greens are unlikely to vote in favour, Independent Senator Nick Xenophon and Family First Senator Steve Fielding are yet to make up their minds.
It's important to deal with Australia's biggest piece of infrastructure in a way that's effective, that's efficient, but also delivers a very significant social benefit, but it needs to be implemented in a way that delivers maximum benefit to taxpayers and to the community at large.
I think there's a lot of politics being played in this, and I'll be glad when this day is finally over.
How worried are you about getting this legislation through in these final few days of the session?
Look, I've always been an optimist that we can pass this legislation. It's critical. It's critical for consumers to get cheaper prices.
And if it does fail to get through intact, would you then have another go when the Greens hold the balance of power in the Senate in July?
Well, I'm not giving up at any stage on it passing the Parliament in the next, or this week and next week. So I remain committed to driving the bill forward and delivering outcomes.
If the government wins the day on this bill, there's still another potential hurdle down the track. The Greens are trying to negotiate a deal to ensure the National Broadband Network is not automatically privatised in several years' time.
Political editor Heather Hewitt there.